We often talk about the certain circumstances with the war in Iran and how the process is going. Are we moving towards a resolution? Are we moving towards a ramping back up? Those are the things that are on the near term. But we are also have been talking all the way through because they're inextricable. What is the consequence both to the global economy and to the U.S. economy because of the stoppage in this dual blockade of the Strait of Hormuz? We want to look into that a little bit deeper today, and we are absolutely delighted to have back with us, or not back with us, but with us today for the first time, Chris Martinsen, who many of you know, and I'm sorry, I'm looking at the wrong screen here. Chris, listen, you're the founder and CEO of Peak Prosperity, economic researcher and futurist, and a really smart guy. And one of the reasons I was so eager to have you on the show today. Welcome to Daniel Davis Deep Dive.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Daniel. It's a real pleasure to be here. It really is.
And as I was saying to a lot of people, or to you before we came on the air here, I've been watching your work for so long because you really do cut through no matter what the popular narrative may be. What is the truth of any given situation, whether that's economic or otherwise? You're welcome on our show because that's where we like to live too. So really good fit for us today, and especially couldn't be a better topic than the one we're here. Now, first thing interesting, when I woke up this morning, I saw a big drop in the price of oil from what I had gone to bed last night. And I thought, oh, well, maybe something happened. Maybe that was good. But then the next thing I see is that this one here that, oh, by the way, breaking news, U.S. gas prices have risen by 47.3%. So maybe the ticker went down on the oil price, but the price I'm paying at the pump seems to have gone up. What is going on with that?
Well, this is a very confusing time because, unfortunately, we have a very, very activist, interventionist government that doesn't really believe in free markets. All this talk about capitalism kind of goes by the wayside when narratives and national strategy or whatever else gets invoked. But it's pretty clear now that official sources have been monkeying around in what's called the oil futures market. There's a couple markets for oil. One is spot, that's physical. I want to buy oil today, buy a tanker, I pay X. But if I want to buy it next month or a few months out, or I'm a commercial producer and I want to hedge and I want to sell oil that I know I'm going to be producing 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months out, I'll sell an oil future. These are the paper futures, which sadly are highly manipulable by people who, run the show in there. And there's very strong evidence now. Pretty much Japan did everything but exactly admit that they were also in there shorting oil futures because that's in Japan's interest, right? They 100% hydrocarbon import dependent, 100%. And so for them, if anything they can do to sort of smack the price of oil down really helps them out because Japan's facing all sorts of other troubles. Their yen is weakening. Their interest rates are spiking. They have fiscal crises, maybe a monetary crisis brewing. The last thing they can afford is expensive oil. So they're doing everything they can with the United States, their top ally, to keep those prices down. And big traders all over the world have been saying that someone just steps in and dumps huge amounts of oil all at once. I mean, price discovery, Daniel, in a market is willing buyers and sellers, there's supply and demand, and that gives you a price that clears both of those elements. When you have something different, which we'll call price fixing, or price setting, what's happening is somebody is coming in and seeking to set the price somewhere else. And so we see this in the oil market. In a single 1 minute candle, 1 minute trading window, you might see as much as 5 or 6 million barrels of oil suddenly get sold. Boom. And they're highly coordinated with these press releases that come out that say things, usually on a Monday or a Friday, usually with some mysterious front running by somebody, which, nobody's investigating, but somebody knows these market moving things are coming and they're ready for that. And if I was running the show and I wanted to manipulate the oil markets, I would just have these headlines all teed up and I would start pushing on the futures saying, I'm just selling, wiping out the bids that are underneath that clearing price. And then when the news comes out, I just hit it really hard, like 5-6 million barrels of oil. And that just makes the price go down. And so that's been the game. It's been happening for a while, but it's going to have a real cost. And I'm very worried about what this is going to lead to if they keep it up.
And let's just take a look at something President Trump said yesterday. I think he's trying to calm everybody down and saying everything's going fine. Don't worry about it. In fact, here I'm not sure that he may be confusing a couple of things here. I don't want to put any words in his mouth, but what he says is a little bit odd. But you can see he's trying to just say everything's fine. Don't worry about it. about Venezuela.
Venezuela was amazing, but now we're doing essentially, it's larger, but we're doing essentially the same thing in Iran. We can't let Iran have a nuclear weapon, and their economy is crashing. The blockade is incredible. The power of the blockade is incredible. They're not getting any money from oil, and hopefully it can be worked out very soon.
You know, it's interesting when he's trying to say this is like Venezuela because we took that over, had about 48-minute war, if you want to.
Yep.
Everything worked out fine. Now we stole their oil and everything. We got good with that too. And now then all this blockade, nothing's getting out there, about to fall any time soon. What do you make of that? Should we be comforted by that?
The best I can say here, Daniel, is it appears to me from the cheap seats that Trump is, I think he honestly believes what he's saying, but it means he's not being given good information by the people closest to him. This is nothing like the Venezuela situation. Obviously, they did the decapitation strike. 5 minutes later, there were inbound drones and missiles dialing in all over our military assets. He keeps saying we're winning. We've wiped out 100% of their Air Force, their Navy. Clearly, these things aren't true. And so it feels to me like Trump is getting some pretty bad information. So we found out last week, NBC News did a report and said, for the first few weeks of the war, Trump was just getting a 2-minute video briefing on the conduct of the war. And it was just those ones you and I probably saw, right? Which is just, missiles blowing stuff up. So all he saw was the United States blowing things up and felt, oh, we're winning from that. He wasn't apparently seeing all the rest of it, which was, the fact that Israel got pretty much, attacked hard by all those missiles. The fact that so many of our bases were either damaged or destroyed, I think all of them to some degree, that we lost our, radars and all the stuff about. But it's pretty clear that Iran was nothing like Venezuela. They were prepared for this. They had a strategy. The decapitation didn't even cause a 5-minute delay in their next response because they had all their distributed, command structures. So totally different beast here. And secondarily, come on, the Strait is geographically impossible to reopen if Iran has any of the armaments we know they have. Anti-ship missiles. It's not just the mines. It's all the stuff. Anyway, war has changed. And I think Iran has the upper hand here at this point.
And part of what he's also doing to calm people's nerves is that image right there that, this is what everybody sees. You don't have to watch the news to know that that's the case every time you go fill up your car. And so he's like, all right, well, you know what? Drill, baby, drill. We're going to increase our production. In fact, we're going to double it within the next year. But then he also brags about all this whole line of empty VLCC tankers coming to the U.S. because they can't fill up in the Gulf. And he's like, hey, this is really cool. We're going to sell a lot of oil and make a lot of money. But as the Politico writes yesterday, they said if the price signals are right, U.S. shale drilling operations can scale up relatively quickly, said Bridget Payne, head of an oil and gas forecasting at Oxford Economics. But that would still take 3 to 6 months to happen. In that time frame, the U.S. might be able to add about 1 million barrels of oil a day, she said, and that comes nowhere near the roughly 10 million barrels of supply currently lost through the Strait of Hormuz. So is it a good idea for us to sell as much oil as we can and fill up those tankers?
This is first off, it's a little bit complicated, but the details are worth it, Daniel. They really are. And Trump is ignorant of the details. I don't know why the Energy Secretary, Chris Wright, is just not doing his job. But the first thing we have to talk about is this. I'm just going to bring up a quick chart from the Energy Information Administration. This is from the first week of April. And what we can see here is that the United States net imports of crude oil at 2.1 million barrels. We're a net importer of oil. It's axiomatic. An importer of oil is in no position to export oil. So we are starting to export oil. Like we import, this is a net basis, right? So we import 6.3 million barrels, mostly heavy, medium, and heavy grades of crude. Our refineries love that stuff. We make a lot of this really light stuff because of the shale plays. We export 4 million barrels of that per day. 6 minus 4 leaves you 2. So we're a net importer of oil. That's point one in this story. And point two is that, well, if we are exporting oil and we are doing that on a basis now, where is that coming from? What we're doing is we're taking our strategic petroleum reserve and we're dialing it out right now at about 1 million barrels a day, and we're pulling it out of there and we're exporting that to the world. So we are technically a net exporter of oil this past week, but that's because we're dipping into our inventories. This is like you have money saved at the bank, and you just to get through a little tough times, you start eating into your savings. That's what we've been doing. And by the way, there's only so long you can do that before you have to stop doing that.
Well, yeah, that's it. That's what I wanted to ask then, because then, and apparently the U.S. isn't the only one using strategic petroleum reserves releases. So that is offsetting what's being bottled up in the Strait of Hormuz. But that it's, and I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, that's what has kept the price. I think it was like 60 something dollars, 65 before the war started. Now it's hovered right around 100 plus or minus, bouncing between the day. It's kept it at that relative slow pace. But if those SPRs either run out or people say, all right, I'm not, this is my end signal, I'm not going to release any once it gets down to this level. Now, all of a sudden, we're going to have a real signal that I don't know that even Japan can price when that one out. Could they?
No, this is the risk, right? So there's a couple of risks here. The first is that we're going to get dangerously low on inventories, and then we're going to have to stop that. There's only two ways you stop it. One, you close your oil markets down, you nationalize it, or you just prevent exports, right? That's a big problem, because if you're going to tell oil companies, which are fairly powerful entities, hey, we're not going to let you sell your oil at current prices for what you could sell it for on the open market. We're going to force you to sell it at this cheap price back here. It's going to be fairly unpopular with a fairly powerful lobby for good reasons, right? The second thing you could just let prices rise to sort of choke off that demand. That's what should be happening. So back in 2022, February, Russia invades Ukraine in its special military operation. Within weeks, oil vaulted all the way up to 120, and it bounced between 100 and 120 for 5 months. And that was just on the prospect that the United States was going to sanction some Russian oil and keep a little bit off the market. This is 5 times larger than that could have possibly ever been right now. And we have to also include, for some mysterious reason, Russian oil and energy and fertilizer infrastructure is getting hit hard since the beginning of the Iran war too. So that's additive to anything we're talking about the Gulf. We also have to now peer over to Russia and notice that the number 2 exporter of oil in the world is receiving daily drone attacks against its key refineries. So this is bar none the biggest. This is so much worse than 2022. It's so much worse than 1973, 81. It's worse than all of those moments put together. And yet oil seems to just want to be just under 100 in the U.S. futures market, which is going to lead to trouble at some point.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, because when you look at the number here, this is a live ticker right here. This is a WTI crude for June. You see, it's just barely over 100. And from what you described there, I mean, one would imagine, man, that number is probably just going to be 120, 130, somewhere up in there. And yet it's not. How long can these numbers be maintained? Because the idea is, well, all these manipulative things can just keep it down there. So we're actually going to be okay, and even in the midterm. Is that true?
Yeah, so I was just trying to find a chart here, but what the real thing we have to look at, where countries begin to get a little nervous about things, is whatever inventories they have. Some countries have strategic reserves. Every country that imports oil has what we call commercial reserves, the tanks outside the refineries. And when you add those two together and you look at how much oil that nation is consuming on a daily basis, you divide one into the other and you find out how many days of inventory they have on hand. And when you get down near like 24 days, that's where the panic starts to set in. If you got below 20, real panic sets in. We are already bouncing down at about the 22-day level here at the United States. So we don't have that much longer. That's, to me, Daniel, this is the ticking clock in the story. People are like, oh, well, we'll just blockade Iran and wait for them to fold. Iran's just sitting over here waiting for our days of inventory to dial down. And so that's the game. And the clock is actually on Iran's side at this point in time, because when that panic finally sets in, for Europe, for Japan, for whoever, all of a sudden we're going to see what we call resource hoarding. Nations are going to say, can't export this anymore. Russia's already limited its exports. China did, then released a few exports for some categories because I guess they had an abundance. But if all of a sudden the United States gets the same religion, all the promises to Europe. Where's Europe going to get its oil and gas from at this point in time? Where's Japan going to get its oil and gas from? Where's the whole Pacific Rim? The fact is, it's not going to be there. So we could easily see oil prices 200. Is that possible? 300, 500. These are all numbers that become immediately possible given the scale of this. And all of this is predicated, Daniel, on the idea that we get to some sort of peaceful resolution and some deal is struck and we begin trying to repair the output from the Gulf starting tonight.
And at least according to the latest news I saw on that front, there's still everybody's thinking that they're on the time is on their side. In fact, this was in the Washington Post just yesterday. Both sides are confident they can outlast the other, and both sides think time is on their side. So right now, it doesn't look like that magic turning of the tap back on is going to happen anytime soon. And let me just ask you, if the magic happened, and tonight both sides wake up and realize, okay, this is not in any of our interests. We're just going to open everything back up. Now, there's a lot of physical constraints with mines, has to be cleared, and a bunch of other stuff. Talk about that separately. But let's go back to the magic formula. It happens tonight. Is that going to then reward all this manipulation that's been happening to keep the price around here, and then everything will be fine? And then over time, it'll just still stay there, and then it'll go back down. Is that what's going to happen?
That's what the narrative is, but I can't see it. And here's why. So if we look back to 2008, right, there was no war going on. What happened was, so this is just before the shale revolution in the U.S. really kicked off. So what we had was, out of 6 quarters, 5 of those, we saw just slight overages of demand relative to supply. Not a lot, 500,000, 750,000 barrels per day. But it was enough that it was just, we were having slight supply disruptions, because there just wasn't enough coming out of the ground for various reasons. And that was enough to send the price in those terms, 2008, to $147 a barrel in July of 2008. In today's dollars, that would be 228. So that was when you had just 1 million barrels a day. I'll be generous, kind of missing for a while. This time, we're missing close to 14.5 million barrels a day so far, including from Russia. I'm going to have to add another 1 million to 2 million barrels a day from Russia now missing in action. And we're 2 months into this, right? So Goldman Sachs estimated, look, if peace breaks out tonight, rainbows, unicorns is beautiful. It would take 6 months to get back to 88% of the normal flows out of the Gulf. That was their best estimate. If we look at it that way, the world is going to be missing, even at that 6-month mark, 2.6 million barrels a day is still missing from those flows.
And by the way, if I could make sure I understand correctly, one of the reasons why it would take that long to get back to 88%, and I wonder if you could explain this a little bit, is this issue of the unwinding of the system, because the system prior to 27 February was that there was like this long string of empty VLCCs coming in, filling up, another one going out, and then this just never stops. So as soon as one's emptied, they go and fill it up, and as soon as one gets filled up, there's another one waiting. But now then, that ended on the 20th, I think, of April. And so nothing, there's literally hundreds, I guess thousands of these things just sitting all over the world, and they'll all have to start coming back in. And why will it take so long, even if the unicorns and rainbows happens tonight? Why will it take 6 months to get back to 88?
Yeah, for 3 reasons. And the first is logistics, which you mentioned, Daniel. And then the second is fixing whatever damage has happened. And I'm going to expound on that just a little bit. And the third is finding out what happens when they bring the oil fields back online that got shut down kind of urgently, which is not the right way to do it. So that could create damage. So first up, logistics. All my contacts in the shipping business tell me this delicate choreography of ships coming and going has been completely bollocksed up. And so just unwinding that's going to be a month or two just to get things back in shape. And of course, this requires the owners of those ships to trust that the piece is durable and real. Okay. So you can imagine there's going to be some hesitation for a while before everybody has the confidence that this is real. So that might be a month of confidence building alone. The second thing is, I think even Goldman Sachs has to be doing some guessing here, because one of the things the United States did early on was they asked, I don't know what language they used, but they asked the satellite companies not to provide pictures of the Middle East or Israel. So a true damage assessment, we don't know. The IEA chief, Fatih Birol, said that 75 energy infrastructure things got struck and damaged. Lightly damaged? Can they be fixed in weeks? We don't know. We did have Qatar come out and say that their Roslafen natural gas terminal LNG train is going to take 2 to 5 years to fix some of that because of the damage to the actual equipment. And the third thing is we don't know when they've turned these fields back on. Like Iraq is totally shut in right now. Kuwait totally shut in. These are old fields, medium to low pressure. They're either doing what's called gas drive or water drive, but it's a very delicate process where you're trying to squeeze the geology underground with these injection wells. And when you suddenly shut that off, this all starts to undo itself. And when you turn it back on, we don't know how much the diminution, the damage to output's going to be, but it's always something. It's very rare situation. You shut a field in and open it back up and you get right back to where you were. So we don't know how much that's going to be, but what if that's 1 million barrels a day missing? Well, now we're back to 2008. The world literally cannot survive on that many missing barrels, particularly since we're going to have to rebuild all these inventories, both commercial and strategic reserves that have been pretty heavily hit during all this time. So this is, listen, play around with the price of oil all you want. From my perspective, when you monkey with free markets, when your invisible hand comes in and visibly disrupts these markets, there's just that much more makeup that you have to do later on. And here's the problem, Daniel. It's not necessarily the destination. If we'd started, getting ourselves up to 150 a barrel at the beginning of the war, that's one thing. But if we all of a sudden have to do that in a single week, when, reality sets in, it's the pace of change that gets you. It's that shock that actually provides more damage than arriving gently at destination. It's kind of like letting your parachute open and do the work and, opening your parachute after you hit the ground, right? Totally different outcomes.
Yeah, I would say so. Well, and that leads to the next obvious question is, let's get back to your logistics portion of that, because you said things have all bollocksed up, et cetera. Now, in the normal case, the system has been going on for literally decades, and so it's pretty easy. You just get in the flow, et cetera. But now then, because there's all these different companies and from all these different countries, and I don't even know where they are. I don't know if you have any visibility on that, where these tankers have gone after they emptied all of their cargo last time. But how will they coordinate that? Because, you can't just turn a signal on and all of these tankers from all over the world just start converging back on the Gulf of Oman. You're going to have a bottleneck there. How is that even going to be organized?
It's a great question. I wish I had a lot more insight into that. You can just imagine it's going to be, there's some that are positioned and they could just scoot right in, but there's a lot of them that are just out of position. And we're starting to hear more and more reports, particularly from the Asian Pacific Rim, particularly around the Singapore refineries, where they're really shortchanged for product right now, that they're going to have to start really limiting production runs. We're hearing all the time that the equivalent per barrel cost that they're paying for jet fuel, and especially bunker fuel or ship oil, is over 200, sometimes higher than $220 a barrel right now. And they're actually looking at shortages that are probably going to erupt from that. So if you're a ship and you know that you got to get over to Singapore, but they don't have any bunker fuel for you to get home again, there's going to be a lot of logistics that are going to have to be worked out here to make sure that we have the ships and the fuel necessary to get all this going. And by the way, every single day this carries on, that problem just gets not linearly worse, but in my mind, exponentially worse.
And you mentioned that a 12 million barrel inventory shortfall per day net coming out of the Gulf from all the problems here. How long can it go? How long can the fiction go on where we keep oil somewhere around 100 barrels a day through all the manipulative means? Because at some point it seems like there's just going to be a physically inadequate enough to conduct economy, to conduct work, to get things done, and then you can't mask that. But it's been masked so far after 60 days. How long do you calculate that can continue?
Well, so far, there's three big distillates that are really important in this idea. So kerosene or jet fuel, it's diesel, and also it's the ship fuel or the bunker fuel. And the United States has been busy exporting its distillates, and Europe needs them. So we're exporting jet fuel, we're exporting diesel. If you look at a 5-year range of how much inventory we have, all of those are now at the bottom of the range and plunging through. So we're about to head into territory very soon. As far as I'm concerned, we're already there. But eventually we wake up and go, gosh, Europe, we're really sorry, but we just can't export any more jet fuel, and so then all of a sudden we watch like European flights are going to have to physically shut down. Now, they've been warning about this for a while. They've already skimped off what we would call low value flights. I think Lufthansa canceled 20,000 flights that, probably were marginal at best. anyway, but we're already seeing that that's an economic impact. But if you actually run short on diesel, your country shuts down. Australia is highly exposed, Japan's highly exposed, Europe is highly exposed. And these attacks on Russia really aren't helping because they were a heavy exporter of things like diesel and jet fuel. So it's astonishing to watch our markets be this disconnected from what seems to me to be just a ground truth reality. Energy is not like monkeying around with silver prices or gold prices or stock prices. Sure, they can do that for a long time. Here's oil. Very simple. We take it out of the ground, we do some things to it, and we set it on fire. Because of that, we have this very simple situation where there's only so long you can eat into these surface stocks. We had both floating inventory, because that was that conga line of ships coming and going as normal. That represents a whole inventory that's on those ships. That's now gone as of April 20th. Now we're eating into onshore inventories, and those are going away. And the United States is doing about 1 million barrels a day out of its strategic petroleum reserve. Probably have about 410 million barrels left in there, but we're pulling out at least 7 a week right now. And there's only so many weeks we can do that before we run out, and can't go any lower because of issues.
And then, so what's your best guess before physical reality impacts paper reality and the price has to go up anyway? How much longer could we continue on the fiction?
Probably about 2 weeks if we're being normal. And if we want to really be insane, it's a whole month. But that's the ticking clock in this story. That's why I'm like, listen, we're either going to have to negotiate, meaning honestly negotiate. We don't just show up in Islamabad with a set of conditions and demands. We're going to have to give some things up, and Trump's going to have to take a couple L's, or what feel like L's, in a normal negotiation. Either we get a negotiated outcome, or you're going to have to do something kinetic and attempt to force the Strait open. I score both of those. It's a rock and a hard place for the United States right now, at least politically. So I don't know what they do about that.
So tell me what you think it might look like, because it sounds to me like, and correct me if I'm wrong here, the longer we push that out, 2 weeks or 4 weeks, the longer we push that out and don't get the resolution we're looking for, then that increases the size of the spike that comes on the backside.
Mm-hmm. So let me put it this way. One of the most robust charts I have in all of economics is a chart that shows the GDP of countries on one axis, and on the other axis is how much oil they're consuming. And it's a straight line. It's so straight. I mean, the dots are a little bit, but it's like pretty much a straight line, meaning that if you want to have more economy, you're going to burn more oil. And this is it makes a lot of sense intuitively, right? Because we use oil to manufacture things, mine things, transport them. That's what we call economic activity. So if you have more economic activity, you have more trucks, more planes, more ships, more mines, more everything. So, okay, with that as an idea, I'm going to ask and answer this one question, which was, we're missing 12.5 million barrels a day. How big was the world economy the last time it was organically burning 12.5 million barrels per day less? And the answer to that is 2011, we would be burning 12.5 million barrels per day of oil, the whole world, less than we are today. Second question, how big was the economy in 2011 compared to today? And the answer is it was 36% smaller. So if you understand the relationship between energy and the economy, and we deduct 12.5 million barrels a day from that, if that goes on till the end of the year, we're going to be seeing a global depression. Because remember, the Great Depression was about a 20 to 25% hit to GDP. We're talking something 30 to 40%. And that's obviously also coming at a time when the world, the West principally, is just saddled up to its eyeballs in debt. Lots and lots of debt. Federal debt, sure, but got corporate debt, household debt. Debt does really poorly in an economic decline. And that's the thing that scares them a lot, is they can't afford to have the decline start. But this path they're on, by artificially setting oil prices low, is just increasing demand for those same products. And it's going to just make it happen faster when that come to Jesus moment finally happens.
And it's just a physical reality. At some point, it must impose itself, right? I mean, there's no way to paper that over. Is that true?
Yeah, this is physics. This is
okay. This
is, all the other prior crises like the dot bomb crisis or the great financial crisis or any of those other ones. Those are basically human foibles, right? Oh, well, we made collateralized debt obligation paper or whatever. So the Fed prints and covers it up. We've even had, I think the Bank of England head just came out the other day and said, we can't adjust interest rates. We can't adjust monetary policy. This is oil, right? We can't, what do they say? Famous saying, can't print oil. We're going to start figuring that out. The problem, I think, my judgment, my assessment, Daniel, is that the United States has been living in this narrative fantasy land for so long that it doesn't, I'm not sure they really understand that this is physics at play. I think they can just continue to shape the narrative and it'll all sort of pencil out. I just can't see how that can happen.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question that that's the case, and there's a concurrent disconnection from reality in what we're talking about with this war thing, and we could talk forever about that one. But I want to stick with this one here. Now, one of the things President Trump says, apparently he is aware of some of these dynamics, and he announces a week or so ago, hey, you know what? Don't worry about it, because a year from now, we'll be doubling our oil output. But I saw in one of your previous shows this chart here to where you show that, okay, how exactly are you going to double our oil? Because for those who may not understand, just generally these green, yellow, and blue, that's kind of the traditional, I guess you call it cheap crude oil that we used to be really good and peaked in 1970. And those you continue to see over the years have continued to deteriorate and go down in terms of their production. The only thing that popped it up is that the tight oil, or the shale oil, as some call it, and it spiked up here pretty good in 2019. And this chart was from 2021, by the way, the one that I was able to find. But I think that actually peaked up a little bit higher. In fact, if you look at the EIA numbers here just last month, they show that we actually had a new record up to around 14 million barrels a day, et cetera. So that has eked up a little bit higher than this chart would have predicted. But still, we're going to be pretty limited on where we can go. Do you see the potential for us to meaningfully increase the amount of production in the United States in a year from now?
Well, if you could bring those two charts up first, that one. Yeah. So let's just talk this through. So yeah, the green, the yellow, the blue. So yellow and blue in this case are Alaska and offshore, which means Gulf of America now, I guess we call it. And green is everything else. And so these were conventional wells. And so what these meant was you stuck a straw straight in the ground. It's more complicated than that. I'm doing it a disservice. But we hit a peak in 1970, and we took our drill rigs in 1970. Just after that, Nixon put this whole program in. We're going to drill for prosperity, basically drill, baby, drill. And we went, Daniel, from about 900 operating rigs to 4,500 operating rigs. And you see it kind of brought it back up there through about 1985, but it didn't achieve the prior peak, even though we quadrupled the effort, the intensity of drilling. And it was just all downhill from there, and it's been downhill. So I think, first, can we agree it's probably very unlikely that the green, the yellow, the blue are going to double? Okay. All right, now that means we're going to have to leave all the doubling up to the red, which is tight oil, which is shale. Again, brilliant story. But if we go to the second chart you put up, and you can see here that it's really a story of the Permian is the big heavy lifter in this story. The Eagle Ford, the Bakken. In fact, if we look at this very carefully, you'll find out that more than 100% of the growth in tight oil output since 2019 has come just from the Permian alone. All the other ones are down a little bit. The Permian's up a little bit more than they were down. So we're really talking about, Daniel, that when Trump says we're going to double oil output, it means the Permian is the only basin left that had even slight growth in it. But now just squint at the top line of this chart up here. I think COVID did its whole big damage there in 2020 and had to recover from that. But if you look, really, since it's kind of like you can sort of see it's bouncing along. It's not moving up aggressively like it used to. It's been bouncing along. And in fact, the all-time record output was October of 2025. We're now 7 months past that, 8 months, whatever we're at. And we're getting less out of the ground today than we were in October. So there's a lot of analysts out there, people I talk to who really model this, saying that, yeah, there's plenty of oil there, but we're not going to get more out. So for Trump to say we're going to double, next question is where?
Well, I wish I could zoom this in a little bit. I can't with the technology I have here, but I guess from that October point, you see all the lines, all the dark blue lines are all trending downwards since where they have been here. This is the breaking news that ExxonMobil and Chevron have defied calls from the White House to increase production. They're saying, no, we're not going to do that. In fact, I think before this, correct me if I'm wrong, I think the EIA prior to the start of this war had already projected either flat or slightly declining for 2027 in the United States because, and I wonder if you can just kind of give a real simplistic explanation. You can't just like walk out to the tap and turn it on higher and get more out. It takes a lot of investment today to get oil out in some number of years from now.
Well, it does. And so it's funny they said resisted because I'm pretty sure what Exxon and Chevron said is, hey, there are operational realities here and we can't just do that. Right. Here's why. Because believe me, if they could pump more, they would. That's their business. They're trying to maximize capital, So if you got it, you pump it. But they have realities, and so they have to manage things. So Exxon has a big footprint in the Permian. They bought up a lot of shale companies. And so their job is to try and optimize, like, how do I get the most oil out of this? It's very delicate. And if they over drill it and reduce the pressure, they might end up damaging the field, getting less out. So it's a super complex business, how they manage fields, pressures, and all that stuff, drill programs. So they have all those running. And the other problem here is that there's one more thing we have to talk about, the oil futures market. So yes, if you see oil's around $100 a barrel today, you'd say, wow, that's going to be super stimulative for these companies. They should just go out and start drilling. But like you mentioned, they don't drill for the oil price today. They look at the futures curve and they say, what's oil selling for in a year when this well comes online? And there, Daniel, it's all the way back to $70 a barrel. It's not worth it to them to even drill faster or more at this point in time because for some reason, the oil markets have decided that oil's going to just go back in price a year from now. They don't believe it. The head of Diamondback Energy said our futures market, oil futures market, is lying to us. They know the reality on the ground. They're wondering. So this manipulation of markets, again, listen, go ahead and manipulate gold all you want. It doesn't, nothing really happens. It sits on a shelf. But because we take oil out of the ground and set it on fire, a couple steps in between, it's not the same beast at all, but they're managing it like it's just another market function that they can control. And the problem is that it sends the wrong signals, the wrong incentives. Oil companies aren't going to expand their drilling, and we're going to get into a severe shortage later on. But some people are questioning, like, is that a feature or a bug? Because, then they're like, okay, well, Palantir is going to tell you how much oil you get to burn this week, Daniel, or something like that. It's crazy where we've gotten to at this point in time. It's the most ignorant of reality that I've ever seen things be.
And for the moment, I want to stick with the unicorns and rainbows magic deal that the war gets over today. What do you think, given the proclivity to continue with magic or manipulation of the markets, but the physical reality is going to impose upon that? In that scenario, what say the August, September, the fall, the end of the summer, start of the fall, what can we expect, or what do you project rather is going to be an oil price in the magic scenario?
Well, I mean, we clearly have to get somewhere between 200 and 300 to begin balancing supply and demand, maybe higher. So if we got to some magic situation where everything opened up, as I mentioned, by fall, we're still going to be, best case, still short 2 to 3 million barrels a day because of all the damage and fixing stuff and all that's going to happen. But the other thing I have to talk about here is that we've been talking about oil, of course, LNG, liquefied natural gas, 20% of the world's supply of that is missing. And the United States can't make all that up. And Australia, the other exporters cannot possibly make it all up. So that's also beginning to really bite. But it goes beyond that. I'm going to show a chart now. This is what's been missing out of the Strait of Hormuz. And these are all different types of ships. So the green on the bottom, bulk carriers. What are they doing? Well, they're bringing stuff like fertilizer, urea fertilizer, sulfur, maybe aluminum, lots of things missing from the Gulf. So this isn't just oil. This is a poly crisis. We're missing as well this next block, the chem prod tanker. So all the chemical products, there are all these big giant refineries like the Al Abqaiq in Saudi Arabia and the big one in Iran, making lots of what are called precursor chemicals. They're making naphtha, ethylene, all these other things that go into and become plastics and everything. It's so impossible to predict what's missing, but this is how many ships have been passing down here, this little red circle. This is what it used to be. Next, container ships, food coming into the Gulf. They're starting to run into issues around not missing food. Also, anything else that comes out in containers. And then here, finally, we have the crude oil tankers missing, then LNG tankers, and finally the LPG tankers, liquefied petroleum gas. And that's what, a lot of the world uses, India in particular, Asia, for cooking and other uses. So this is what's missing, and it's helium. 33% of the world's supply gone. We need that for chips. Russia also pulled back its exports of helium because it's a byproduct, if you will, of natural gas extraction. And so they're preserving their own to make fiber optics. I think you know why. And we're missing sulfur, sulfuric acid. We're already seeing impacts in the mining operations because they use sulfuric acid to heat leach things like copper out. We're seeing aluminum shortfalls in aluminum price hikes. So this right here, you just squint at it, all of this missing stuff, Daniel, represents what we'll call the pig and the python. So even if magic breaks out tonight, what we're going to see is that the whole system's going to have to work through all of those disruptions and all of those key, very upstream precursor chemicals and products that go into everything that we call our modern economy. We've never experienced a shock like this and across so many different vectors at once. So every one of those things I just mentioned could have its own entire analysis and would be its own crisis. Together, well, we don't know. I'm pretty sure that printing fake oil, paper oil, is not the answer.
Well, let's just take a look at a couple of other things. So did I understand you correctly to say that in the magic scenario, by the fall, if things are going to be brought into actual balance, it'll have to be somewhere around $200 a barrel?
Or more.
Lord have mercy. Okay, well, that's scary because now we're going to look at in the remainder of the time we have here quickly two other scenarios because magic is the least likely to happen. We all hope it does. It's not zero, but it's probably not very high. The other two are either one, President Trump just says, you know what, that chart out there, the Washington Post piece I showed you where everybody's saying, hey, you know what, time is on our side. We can outlast the other. So they continue on. So scenario two is that the blockade continues on. And let's say it's a month from now, just 1 month from now, what does that do? Meaning that nothing has changed at all. What does that do to September?
Well, it just makes it a lot worse. And as the blockade goes on, again, the pressure is building, the clock is ticking, and I believe it's ticking more loudly on our side than Iran's side. Iran's pain tolerance is pretty high. They demonstrated that in the Iran-Iraq war. They're this close to their goal that they've been preparing for 40 years. I don't think they're just going to back down because things got a little tight for them. They're ready for this. I believe the Iranian pain tolerance is very high. I think ours is set around $5 a gallon national average price. I think that's about does it. And so the other ticking clock for Trump, of course, is the elections coming up in November, right? So this has to be resolved soon. And, we've seen them come out with this wall of, I consider propaganda to say, oh, this is hurting Iran really badly. They're going to have to fold soon. Now, that sounds like a hope strategy to me. We hope that they're going to fold soon because of this pressure we're putting on them. Maybe, maybe not. Hope is a terrible strategy in investing and probably in this situation. The other problem that we're going to be facing here is that the wild card in all of this, because it was just a statement that came out on Israel's Channel 12 that said they feel like they announced, who knows what the reality is. They announced that they had been given the green light to go ahead and attack Iran's energy infrastructure and its power plants because they had determined somehow that the Iranian negotiations weren't going well. Now, whether that's true or not, if we all know that there's always the chance that Israel may just decide to get this all going in a kinetic fashion again. There may be IRGC people who think they want to get it going kinetic again. If it goes kinetic again, the reason I'm raising all this is that what Iran has said is like, well, we're going to target several things here. First, American ships, but also the East-West pipeline that is supplying 3 to 4 million barrels a day of relief crude coming out of Saudi Arabia to the Yanbu port in the Red Sea. They're going to shut down the Fujairah pipeline and port that's getting more out through Oman, and possibly even the Strait over there on the Red Sea. So if they did that, you can take whatever I've just told you and just double it, because that would be another 10 million barrels a day that's now missing in action.
Well, that's not a good number there. And you kind of talked about it a little bit here, but I'll just add the option number 3 is whether it's Israel or the United States, as Trump says, you know what? I'm just going to push the button here, and we're going to try one more time for the kinetic version here. and I know because I've got some sources connections into those who are deployed into the tip of this, and they all say we're all cocked and loaded and ready. We've in fact seen some information out today. It says that there's continued to be a continued flow of C-17, C-5, C-130 transports, bringing all kinds of additional ammunition and stockpiles, KC-130 tankers. Everything is in place that if President Trump gives that order, that it'll again launch in. So what happens to that September if the U.S. says, no, we're going to go in, we're going to pound them, and then Iran does what it has already claimed, and they strike all the GCC and Israeli energy sources? What does that do to September?
It just pushes it out who knows how far. So there's only a certain amount of damage you can possibly fix. So far, Iran has been engaged, as you know, in tit for tat. And I think pretty effectively, right? If we hit one of their desal plants, they hit. If Iran came in and bombed that big oil depot just south of Tehran, and so Iran hit some other depots in the GCC area. So they've been playing tit for tat, but they've promised that if this goes on again, this next tat is going to be very damaging. And in this tit for tat, they've been a little bit gloves off on actually hitting the core of the refinery complex. Yeah, if you hit the big tanks and they catch very dramatically on fire and make lots of black smoke, those are relatively easily replaced. But if you hit the cracking towers or the more sensitive pieces of the refining trains, then those can take a long time to rebuild. They're all custom built, right? And it would take a while to get all that done. So,
and I'm sorry, when you take a while, 6 months, yeah. 2 years.
It would probably take a year, but that's under normal circumstances, not when you have to replace 8 of them or 10 of them or 100 of them all at once, right? The capacity just isn't there to really build those quickly because the places that build these aren't that many, And so if we get to openly destroying the direct infrastructure, I don't think there's any recovery from this. And you have to measure it in years. And then we have to start asking questions, what happens to our financial markets when we're printing money like crazy, spending money like crazy, and there's an actual shortage on top of that? It's going to be the biggest inflation we've ever seen.
And what does that look like in terms of an average person's daily life in the United States? Is it just more when they fill up, or what other impacts could that have?
Well, the direct impacts are going to simply be anything that's missing in action. Like there's just, we didn't make enough plastic, so we don't make enough plastic bags, so we couldn't bag the potatoes in this harvest. Like there'll be lots of food inflation, obviously. There'll be regular energy inflation, just gas at the pump, all of that. But those have these secondary effects that bleed into everything because, oil is such an important component of the manufacturing and shipping. So pretty much everything just dials up. This gets wonky really quickly because the Fed was trying to get on an interest rate cutting program, and you can't convince people to buy bonds at 4% if inflation's at 8 or 9 or 10%. I actually think we're facing a situation where we could be heading into the high double-digit inflation over the next 2 years under that scenario, where we get to 18-20% inflation.
Wow.
At that point,
wow,
everything, mortgages, auto loans, everything gets impacted at that point in ways that are almost impossible to predict. But we just had Jamie Dimon come out, and we also had Hank Paulson come out in the last week, and both of them said, this what's happening in the bond market could be, and I'm quoting directly here, terrible. That's kind of, hyperbolic language for guys who are usually pretty diplomatic. There's a lot of rumblings now that our credit markets could really get destroyed.
That's very sobering. And one would imagine, you said, those are public statements. One can only imagine that behind the scenes in the White House, there's got to be alarm bells going on. I know that for the military side, I have pretty good in sources that say even all the way up to the Joint Chiefs of Staff level that all the commanders are of one voice saying, don't restart this just militarily because it can't work. We can't force the straight open. You mentioned at the first, there's so many ways they could do it. You can't militarily compel that. It's just not, we don't have the resources for it. It just doesn't exist. So they're saying, don't try. But then there's another whole group that are screaming, no, it will work. Trust me. And they'll try this. So he's kind of in the balance there. But there has to be a similar kind of discussion going on economically. And President Trump is a lot more knowledgeable personally for the economics than he is for the military side. So it would seem that would augur against him listening to the war hawks in this case and to do something that makes more sense. Do you have any knowledge or insight into what may be behind the scenes in the White House being told to him economically?
No, I mean, there was this Cy Hirsch article that came out, I think, yesterday, and he mentioned that from an Israeli contact that Trump suddenly has sort of realized maybe he didn't get the best of information from Bibi or wherever he was getting his information. I think, the assessment is Trump thought it was going to be like Venezuela, just didn't understand for some reason that Iran is totally a different beast from Venezuela. I mean, completely different. So now he sort of figured that out, and he has a tiger by the tail and he doesn't know what to do. And again, his options now, the clock is ticking and he's going to have to choose. Either he's going to have to concede some things that I think, from what I understand of him, are going to be difficult psychologically to do, or he's going to have to go hard against this. But he can't just continue to wait this out and hope that they're going to fold before we do, because actually it's not just the United States on the line, it's the whole world economy. And so China's going to begin to have some things to say about this. Russia is going to have some things to say about this. The whole rest of the world is going to have things to say about this. And it's been a little awkward watching Trump go, well, if we walk away from the strait, we'll let the rest of the world open it up. We'll be fine. I'm not sure diplomatically that's like the right message to be sending when the rest of the world is facing the prospect of starvation, if not famine, based on the fact that 40% of the world's nitrogen fertilizer went missing in action during the spring fertilizing season.
So let me ask you this: given all of that, if somebody from the White House were watching this show right now, they said, you know what, Chris needs to talk to the president here and give him some advice. If you could give him advice and he would just say yes to whatever you would say, what would you recommend as a course of action right now to get us back on a path to limit the damage for this fall?
We would have to do whatever was required to make peace. We'd have to understand something that's going to be very difficult, which is that Iran actually holds the cards in this story. And we're going to have to find out what their demands are. And they've been pretty clear about it, right? Hey, we get control over the strait. We want reparations, right? That sounds like a giant L. Whoever pays reparations is usually the loser in the story, right?
Right.
Typically. And they want, the reparations to include the idea that all the sanctions get lifted, frozen assets get lifted, and then they want guarantees that there aren't going to be any more such attacks. I don't know how you give that guarantee without putting a new leash on Israel, which no American president seems to have wanted to do since LBJ, right? So that's the wild card in all of this is, if the United States continues to arm and fund Israel in this story, I don't know how you make a security guarantee because of their history in how they've behaved. So that's probably going to be the hardest part about all of this is figuring out how to put Israel back in some sort of a box, which, again, no president's done in my lifetime. So I'm not real clear how that happens. Sounds hard.
Economic pain may have a way of introducing a way to do that. And just hope it's not too late. So bottom line here, if I can kind of summarize all this, there's no good plan here. There's no good path that we can take. And this number that we have right now is whatever is 102 as we're speaking right now, 101 at the moment. That number can't sustain. And by the fall, even if we get the magic unicorn method, we're going to be paying a lot more. That's the best case scenario. And then the worst case scenario is uncharted territory. We don't even know, but that is the range of our options at this point, no matter what. Is that a fair statement?
It's pretty fair, but there's one last sort of thing hanging out there that could happen, which is that if magically somehow Alberta's output and Venezuela's output and Mexico's output were all combined with our output, we could sit on that for a pretty good piece of time. But it means, of course, moving from that unipolar world to the multipolar world, the dust settles. China now has access to that whole region with Russia. We have access to this region, and we sort of have to content ourselves with that arrangement. That could work, right? But this whole idea of the United States. What's that?
What would that result in by the fall?
About as much oil as we would need to conduct ourselves for quite a while, particularly if Venezuela's made more business friendly and durable in some durable way. They actually have pretty significant oil deposits down there. It's going to take huge investment, hundreds of billions to bring it because of the quality of the oil issues and all that. And Alberta has magnificently large, very, very large oil reserves in their bitumen or oil sands, as they call them, tar sands, as we used to call them. So between those, you actually have a pretty decent arrangement, but it would require all new geopolitical arrangements. Canada's not really that happy with us at present, right? So I'm not sure they're going to be sidling up to that part of the
neither
table.
is Mexico.
Either is Mexico, right?
But even that, correct me if I'm wrong here, in terms of just in between now and September, just physically they couldn't ratchet up that much more production, or could they?
No. Basically, Venezuela's back to just about 1 million barrels per day, which is that's all they can actually do without massive investment. That stuff's going to take years. They have what's called the Orinoco tar belt, which is literally, you could get this stuff out of the ground with a spatula or maybe a heavy spoon, right? It's just it takes a lot. And then they have the Merez field, which is good. It's good stuff. And we've been importing that into the United States for decades and decades, right? And so we love that stuff, goes right into our refineries, makes the kind of products we like. And so, but that's tapped out at about 1 million barrels a day, and it's not going to get, it won't get higher without years of investment.
So the bottom line is, between now and September, there's no scenario where it comes out good for us. That's what I'm hearing. Do I hear right?
That's correct. Unless something changes. I mean, I'm telling you, we need those rainbows and unicorns. We need them tonight.
We do. Well, listen, Chris, thank you so much for bringing this to light and just telling us like it is, even if we don't like it here. And we, here you can see peakprosperity.com. That's where Chris is. And man, if you are hungry for more, go there right now and find out what Chris is doing. He's also got a great podcast that we have seen and we've used on this show before. So thanks so much, Chris.
Daniel, my pleasure, and looking forward to having you on my program as well.
Looking forward to that too. Thank you very much. And we appreciate you guys. Also, we're going to be back at, I think it's 12:30. Gary, is that the next one here we got? The next show we got coming up, I think it is. Well, oh yeah, with Nima. That's right. So we're going to find out what's going on the ground inside of Iran. It's things are promoted as one way in the U.S. press, but we're going to find out what's really going on behind the scenes in Iran. And what are the complications that we don't know of? So we can find out if we can get to this rainbows and unicorn version that Chris was talking about here. We'll find out that today at 12:30. Is that right, Gary? Am I saying the right time?
Yeah, yes, 12:30. Yep.
Okay, good. Very good. Thank you very much. All right, well then, that's about 30 minutes from now. So we'll see you then on the Daniel Davis Deep Dive. Don't forget to tell your friends, the ones that love to listen to podcasts. Get them to add Daniel Davis Deep Dive to their podcast list. They need to know what you know. They can get it to where they already get their podcast. You just got to tell them.